Hi, I'm Jim.
And I'm David.
And this is the Practical Guitarist Podcast.
The podcast for people who eat, sleep, and breathe guitar. I'm back.
We're back. It's been a while.
I'm alive.
It's been a while.
I'm alive. So if you guys didn't know what happened, I got an intense ear infection in my left ear that was so bad that I couldn't wear headphones. And then when I went to the doctor, I started getting medication that didn't do anything at first. And then I went to another doctor. They gave me different medication. And that started to help. But what ended up happening was the ear infection got worse in both ears, and there was this point of equilibrium where they were like really bad, and I couldn't wear headphones at all. I couldn't sleep. I was laying on my back to sleep and stuff because I couldn't lay on my side. And then all of a sudden, like, the stuff just started, going down, and everything was okay. Now I've still got problems with my left ear, but we're going to get that taken care of. I actually spoke with the doctor today. I sent them a message. They said they would refill antibiotic for me if I need it. So hopefully next week I'll be able to be back at 100%. But it was excruciatingly painful. And I know people make jokes. Oh, this isn't just an ear infection. Listen, this was not your average ear infection. I have had ear infections my entire life, and I am one of those people that's like, no big deal. No, this was like laid up in the hospital kind of bad. So I took some time off from the show, and I wasn't going to push Jim to do an episode when I wasn't around. And so here we are 3 weeks later or 2 weeks later or whatever it ended up being. Feels like
I'm terrible at solo episodes.
Well, it's not just that, but this is just an eternity of we were kind of going back and forth last week trying to get an episode out, and just neither of our schedules is lining up. And because I've been okay for a couple of days to be able to podcast. But so here we are back on the show, back in the saddle again. Which is probably going to be the episode title. Jim and I wanted to address some things that have been going on in the group. I think one of the things that came up was, I think it was Derek Durance who bought a Martin acoustic guitar. And then there was an issue where he was posting pictures of this gap. And there was some conversation going on about bolt-on neck guitars and set neck guitars. Now, before we even get down that path, I want to point out something to our listening audience. I'm not an acoustic guitar expert. I am in no way, shape, or form qualified to talk about acoustic guitars the way I am about electric guitars. To the point where I actually thought solid top acoustic guitar meant that it was not book matched, that it was a single solid continuous piece, and that laminate didn't have anything to do with the what I would call like the vertical laminate, where the top is one solid piece or two pieces that are book matched, and then they stick pieces to the bottom of that. That's actually how they do a laminate top. I didn't know that until about 2 weeks ago. So, but I did know about bolt-ons, and I did know about construction that way. I just didn't understand the whole laminate process and how you would tell a laminate top, which there's various ways, and manufacturers get more and more clever on how to hide them. So it's kind of an interesting juxtaposition, I think, to at least let our listeners know that I am not an expert in everything, and nor is Jim. And sometimes we get it wrong.
Right.
So, Jim, you were kind of shocked and surprised that Martin does, that they do, set necks and bolt-ons.
Okay. Well, so bolt-ons are. All right, we should talk a little bit about set neck and bolt-on guitars when it comes to acoustics, because it is done differently with different companies.
Sure, they all do it differently.
Our friends at Taylor have their own way of doing it.
Taylor is 2 bolts, countersunk. I do not believe they use adhesive in a Taylor joint.
That is correct. They don't. And they do that on purpose so that you can move the neck in relation to the top.
Right.
And it's for maintenance and so on. So there's a very good purpose that Taylor does it the way they do. So I'm not here to judge it. At first, I thought bolt-on was like what the electric guitars,
the reptile dentistry style of bolt-on acoustic guitar, where there's 4 bolts like a Stratocaster.
Right.
And if you search for bolt-on acoustic, those are the pictures that come up in Google image search, and there's a reason for that. And that's because you cannot see the bolts on an acoustic guitar since they're inside the body.
Right.
They use a special Allen or screwdriver to get in there, to get to the hex key, Allen wrench, whatever, inside the guitar to actually tighten and loosen those so that they don't have to reach in if they can avoid it, and work on the inside. Because you could imagine what turning a bolt on the inside of an acoustic guitar is like if the sound hole is something like on an Ovation, for example.
Yep.
And so now in terms of tonality, I think there's some misconceptions, because I really do believe, at least in my impression and from some other people I've spoken with on this topic now, I think the construction of the body matters more than how the neck is attached.
Okay. All right. I'm gonna go out on a limb, and I'm going to say that they're equally important when it comes to an acoustic. And the reason I'm going to say that is when you mic up an acoustic, we mic at somewhere around the 14th to 16th fret. I should say 12th to 14th fret, wherever the body binds to the neck. So there is a correlation, or causation, for where the two meet. So so the way Taylor does it, and the reason they do it this way, is they kind of make a very unique joint between the two, and they use the bolts so that you can move the neck like a tilt.
Mm-hmm.
And you can remove the neck to do maintenance.
Right.
Now I'm going by one lifetime luthier, but his father is a relatively famous one-off builder for people, and he does acoustic guitars. So he grew up with it. I mean, he was a kid, and his dad showed him how to do all the stuff. All right, so he told me, straight up, that it is a known thing that Taylor, Martin, they all need work done on their tops at a certain age. Okay. Yeah. Comes to an age, you have that pull. So Taylor said, you know what we're going to do? We're going to make it easier. We're going to make it so the luthier can pull the neck off, and they don't have to heat it, remove it, go through the re-glowing process. All right. That's fair enough. The Martins, that when they connect with bolts, the bolts are meant to just hold it in place,
right?
So that it can be
the glue joint is solid, right?
Right, and that's what started this whole thing. One of our listeners had posted a picture. We had a Martin, and in the Martin there was a gap, and I said there should not be a gap like that in a Martin. Martin glues the neck, and that's when everybody said, "No, you're wrong. They do bolt-on." Well, they do bolt-on, but they also glue.
No, they do a mix. It's about 50-50. Their budget models are all bolt-on.
Right. But that particular guitar, I couldn't find anything that suggested it was bolt-on. That model.
Yeah, I couldn't tell you offhand.
Nope, and I couldn't either. But that said, that might be one of those bolt to glue type arrangements.
They may only be doing that for country of origin, so it just may be like an unwritten rule. If it comes from here, then this is how we do it.
Exactly, and that particular model is a. I don't want to say this in a negative way, so this is not to be a negative.
It comes from the top end Mexico, right? I mean, that's.
I think it's a low end American.
Oh, is it?
It might be a top end Mexican or low end American. I saw it as a low end American. That's what I could. That's what I.
I didn't know offhand, and I wasn't going to go dig. It wasn't all that important to me, but I
Yeah,
was
I'm
more
going by
interested in
memory.
the bolt-on because the people like bolt-on, that's terrible. And it's like so. Um, I started asking around, and it's like, well, it's not necessarily a bad thing because I have
Right.
heard a birdie from a local shop that will remain nameless that I reached out to in regards to this that sells acoustic guitars, and asked them, what they thought of Taylor's construction. And one of the the interesting thing was I got one person from the store that told me, yeah, they're fine. I mean, and I got another person told
Sure.
me they warp all the time, the next warp. And I don't know that that's necessarily a commentary on the bolt-on construction so much as, at least in a Taylor, if your neck warps, you can replace it.
Yep.
Um, so it's got that going for it. But I wanted to talk a minute about what some of these acoustic guitar companies do
But
to cheapen their guitars, like to get them down to the
what?
price point.
Well, I wanted to make one more point about one of the other high-end guitars that somebody said they're bolt-on. All right. Taylor is really the only high-end company that does higher end guitars that are bolt-on.
I thought some of the carbon
The,
fiber guitars are bolt-on.
that's exactly what I was going to say. The other one is Rain Song,
Right,
right? Song
right.
that's carbon
I think
fiber.
I
Yeah.
think so.
So I did some reading. The thing about Rain Song is just what you said. You spoiler alert guy.
Sorry, I'm
It's
sorry.
carbon fiber.
God
Yeah,
forbid
no,
that the audience
no.
knows about it 5 seconds before you say it,
Yeah.
Jim.
But you're absolutely right. So it's carbon fiber. It's not an acoustic in the way that we know acoustics. So it doesn't make any sense to glue carbon fiber together. That doesn't make any sense at all. It makes sense to have a different type of joint. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so bottom line though, if you like the sound of the acoustic guitar, you like the sound of the acoustic guitar.
That's
Like, what the
exactly
hell is
right.
the problem?
And we
Um,
and we were talking about that before.
if you
If you
like the
like the
sound of it, you
sound of
like the
it, you
sound of
like
it.
the feel of it.
Now here's the hilarious part to me. So, going back and forth in some conversation with other people about this now, it has been pointed out to me, and this is something I wasn't keenly aware of because I'd played most of the Martins I've played have been, your typical like normal Martin-esque style guitar. But I started looking at spec sheets as a result of these conversations, and it came across some stuff and ended up having some conversation with one of the guys in Old Stumpy and some other people. Um, they did plywood necks in
Yeah.
Martins. They call them Stratabond, but Stratabond is basically pretty looking plywood that they use for gun stocks. And Martin decided to
Yep.
start using Stratabond, which is hilarious to me because
And they made sure they used that name because they didn't want people to say, "Oh, that's," because unless you were a woodworker, you wouldn't know that that was a type of plywood.
yeah, or that it's basically like driftwood that looks pretty. That's basically what it
Sure.
is, and it's glued together, which is hilarious to me because now you've got like a pound of glue in your neck,
Yep.
and so these guitars they still make guitars with Stradibond necks, which is just amazing to me. I figured the guitar buying public would be like, "Are you effing out of your mind?" But apparently somebody must like it. I don't know. So they do the Stradibond thing. They also have what they call exotic hardwood necks, and that's basically like whatever they had laying around that day that they were going to make the neck on that guitar out of is what they made it out of. And
It's basically leftover wood. That's what
and they had that listed on guitars for $2,000, which is why I'm like, oh my Lord. Like, if you can't tell me whether it's mahogany or, I don't even know what other woods they're using right now, but I had the list up the other day and I was like, that's nuts. You can't
they can
tell.
by serial number.
Oh yeah.
You have to, yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, like, the guitar model should specify what the wood is. I mean, come on. It's not like, Strats where they have two wood options where you can get it in maple or you can get it in, rosewood, but it's always going to be a
Right.
maple neck. This is
Right.
like a whole other animal, where it's, oh, well, this might be mahogany. This might be, it might be some African limba. It might be.
Yep.
They're like full
It's
of
funny, right?
and this is this is CF Martin, people. Like, this is not a fly-by-night company. This is
Well,
somebody who has an incredible reputation for building instruments that are of world-class quality.
what was it? Was it in the late 70s, maybe early 80s, when Martin decided that they had to get into the lower end? I say lower
Then
end,
that
the
wasn't
mid
that when they
tier.
started the Sigma line or whatever?
I think so, yeah. And so the important thing was, I don't remember exactly the line, but it was like Martin was out of everybody. Martin and Gibson were out of that. That's why Taylor went and did his thing. He was like, I can do this. I can make this happen. And if you look at the time frame, kind of makes sense. He pushed them, and he wasn't the only one. He's just one of the obviously one who rose above, right?
Right.
And um, so the thing about that story is that when they made the decision to do that, um, the creation of all these lines of guitars, it only made sense if you're in marketing and you're in, you've got people in engineering. Engineers are going to have to say, oh, well, most of our stuff is built at this little place, and what is it? Not
It's
Nazareth. It's
Nazareth,
the other one.
Nazareth, Pennsylvania,
Is it
right?
Nazareth, Pennsylvania? Um, I knew it was PA, but I couldn't remember if it was Nazareth or the other one. That's like that. Anyway, you only have so much, and you can only get so much that, it costs too much money to put into a guitar. Or every little fine piece of wood that you put in there. Have you ever opened have you ever opened and smelled a $10,000 Martin? I'm being serious. I'm being honest here.
No,
Have you ever done that?
no.
Okay, I have. And as recently as a few months ago, and it is an experience to open the case. We all gathered around to open up a $10,000 Martin, because when you opened it, it was supposed to be a 1939 relic, reissue thing. New car smell goes out the window. You know, it's it's like it's like you open it up and you're in a forest. I mean, dead serious. It is the most incredible experience. And then playing it, you play that guitar, and I'm dead serious when I tell you this, because this is coming from a guy who is not an incredible acoustic guitar player, right? I sat down and played that thing, and there were notes and tones and volumes I didn't know existed in the acoustic world. And I'm dead serious when I tell you, unless you've actually sat down and actually played one of their super high-end guitars. And that's not even one of the more there are guitars that they make that are in the $100,000 range, right?
Yeah, but I
Um,
mean, that's out of the realm of affordability
but
for most people.
right. And that's what I'm saying. And so that's why they had to get into this stuff that was like, I mean, even their low end, high end guitars are in the thousands, right? But if we think about it, look at how much money is hanging on this wall. And of course, there's two of them missing because they're in their cases. But um, and into my pedal board, and in my if all I had was an acoustic, wouldn't that be about the same amount of money? We've talked about that before,
I mean, yeah,
right?
yeah, but it's not. But that's the thing. You can't gig with one guitar, right? So you might
I'll
think
ask.
you
Let's ask
can.
Tony
All right.
Emmanuel.
No, I guarantee you,
Tommy, maybe.
I guarantee you, Tommy Emmanuel does not gig with one guitar. I
Well,
guarantee it.
I, I'm willing to bet that he plays one guitar most of the night.
He has a signature model, so he's got the one he plays most of the time. He breaks a string, he's grabbing the other one, text changing that string. That's
Of
absolutely
course,
true. But you're not getting
of
through a
course.
gig with one guitar. Period. Never going to happen. Not. You will not risk that. Even guys like Stevie Ray, who are instantly identified with that one guitar, they had backups, multiple backups, because that would just be the sensible thing to do. And that's what those
Let me.
$10,000 guitars are aimed at, is the guys that go on stage and make $1,000 or $2,000 a gig every night.
Yep,
That's who those are aimed at. They're not aimed at
that's
you and
true.
me. And I honestly don't think so. Here, I'm gonna give you my side of why I think Martin went the cheap route. Okay,
Sure.
Martin decided to lower their costs because Martin was on the verge of bankruptcy. Okay, nobody was buying Martins in the 80s.
Yeah.
No one. And they were kind of panicking. And if I recall, that was when the one guy, the family member, returned to run it, and so he said, "Well, one of the things we got to do is we got to make an affordable Martin." And
Yep.
they wanted to go the Fender Squire route with the sub brand, so they started with Sigma, because they didn't want to tamper with their good name, and that kind of didn't work out. People were not willing to buy a Sigma; they wanted a Martin, and I think it really just boiled down to the fact that acoustic guitars were not selling during that time period. They had somehow lucked out, ended up in a situation where they were on the verge of bankruptcy because they
Yep.
didn't see the writing on the wall. And then all of a sudden, in the early 90s, like things start flipping around and the company starts doing better. And I think a lot of people tend to blame the CEO when a company does better, but sometimes it's just trends in the industry, right? I mean, you had what I think it was Kurt Cobain was playing Martins. I think there were other people at that time during the grunge movement that were playing Martins that sort of
Yeah.
like flipped the world on its head. And
Yeah. If you think about it, it was the power of the electric guitar, and Eddie Van Halen, who killed you know,
acoustic guitar, not just Martins,
acoustic
but
guitar.
acoustic guitar, right?
Yeah,
Um,
that's what I'm saying. In general, acoustic guitar in general was going out the window. Everybody wanted to be,
they had
um,
ovations and stuff. Do you remember that? Ovation became real pop. Wasn't it Every Rose has his thorn guitar
yes.
and Ovation or something?
Oh. And of course, Heart was an Ovation group.
But
One
it
of the
makes
few bands that
it
had
makes
acoustic
sense
at
because
that time.
they were playing these venues where they didn't
Right.
care what it sounded like unplugged. They
Right.
were more about what it sounded like plugged in, and that's fine.
Yeah.
We still have guitars like that. Look at the Acoustasonic. That's what it's for. Um,
Yep.
and I I guess all I'm saying is that it's really interesting what these companies have done to get cheap, and whether it's do a spin-off brand, compromise their quality, like Martin has done with the Stratobon next. I would argue that's a compromising quality, especially when you can get. See, part of it has to do with the fact that they don't want to dabble in overseas production. Like everything they have comes from the North American continent. It comes from Mexico, or it comes from the United States, and they may be doing some other South American production, small runs or something. But I don't think they're doing anything north of the border. Um, And that's really interesting because there are some outrageously good acoustic guitar companies in Canada. I mean, just insanely good. And
Yeah. Of course.
one of the funny little excursions I've been on is I've been looking at Seagull really hard. They make an all solid wood guitar right now for $800. All. I mean, the sides are solid. The bottom is solid. The back of the guitar is solid.
That's the one I
And
said. Have you looked at this one?
yeah, the Maritime. Well, they make two of them. So there's a Maritime, and then there's the Coastline. I think I think
Yep.
it's a Coastline. I'm looking at the Coastline really hard because I'm like, you can't beat an all solid wood guitar for $850. I
Yeah,
mean,
and if memory serves, I think those trees are all from, or the wood is all from trees from the west coast of Canada. So
it's all
that
old growth, and
yep,
um, and the fact is, it. This is something I didn't understand as much either. The reason why people love Martins is because they claim that because Martins are the really expensive Martins, of course, are made out of solid wood that they open up and they breathe over time.
yep,
And I'd always assumed that was like kind of a mythological thing, but I'm finding that more and more people are saying no, that's not mythology. The wood
nope,
dries, and the fibers loosen over time. And I guess I mean, I shoot recurve bows on the side, and there's a lot of lamination
same
going
here.
on in that process. But you definitely break in a bow, and I can imagine an acoustic guitar is the same sort of process. So
Yep,
I, I totally get it. But this is me telling our audience, I don't know all
right,
this stuff. I don't claim to know all of this stuff. I'm going to be the most amateur I've ever been when I talk about it on the show, because I want people to realize, like, everything here is a learning experience. Everything we do.
right,
When you listen to our show, and if you take the information we're giving you seriously and you run with it, or if you just laugh it off and be like, you guys don't know what you're talking about, I don't care. The reality is we provide infotainment, but I
right,
feel like there's a clear line when I'm saying I don't have enough experience to make a real statement about something, and I'm probably going to look like a fool. I am an electric guitar player, right? And
Right.
acoustic is a totally different world. It is very similar in that the instrument is strung the same way to an extent because you have a wound G on most acoustics. Um, but it's different in that resonance, the materials matter so much more in the acoustic guitar world than they do in the electric world. I know people are like, "Oh, well, you've got to have a mahogany body to sound like a Les Paul." Listen, you can get other woods that'll sound like a mahogany body. The construction and the hardware matters a hell of a lot more in an electric guitar than just like what wood selection you use. So, as Jim
I
points to his
yeah.
Gibsons,
um, yeah, I mean, we've said this before. With an acoustic, the more money you put into it, the more you're going to get out of it. That more will come smaller as you get higher,
sure.
but it's still going to happen, and you are going to get more out of it. And I truly believe, while I still think woods are important, even in an electric, I think the glues are less important. Not that they're not important, just they're less important. Like the glue that they're using on the Gibsons, as long as it's going to hold the neck while it's hanging on my wall and it, playing it's those are the things that have to stay. If that glue gives out, then there's a problem. You know
Well,
what I mean?
Well, I was just talking
Um,
about the impact on what it sounds like with the
right,
hardware and
right.
stuff.
That's
Right.
that's what I was getting at. So there's a longevity. Now, I think that's where the wood in an electric are going to be, because in an electric, the glue or the bolts are doing what? They're holding it in place,
Yeah,
right?
it's tension.
That's the only thing they're doing. They're just holding it in tension. There's a little bit of sound transfer, not as much. Now you take an acoustic, and that thing's got glue everywhere, right? And so that glue matters
Way
much,
more.
much more.
But even I would argue because of because of the nature of the way an acoustic is constructed, because you're actually relying on the wood to vibrate, that's
Yep.
really what causes that. In an acoustic guitar,
Yep.
there's not much vibration. I have
No.
or an electric guitar, I mean. I
Yeah.
have played electric
Vibration.
guitars that vibrate like a mofo. And when they do, my reaction to it is actually usually the opposite of what you think it's going to
Yeah.
be, which
Yeah.
is
It's
that,
like, oh,
well, and the reason it's not because you're like, oh, it's vibrating too much. It's
right.
because you know that all of the vibration is getting lost in the wood. You
Yep.
want that guitar to be stiff as a board. You don't want to feel
That's right.
anything. I mean, that's where your sound comes from. In an acoustic, it's a whole other animal. You want it to vibrate. You want it to resonate because that's where your sound comes from. Um,
Exactly.
And I know some people will say the opposite. Well, and now I'm not talking about a guitar that's acoustically loud. Okay, you could
Yeah.
achieve
That's two
that
different
with
things.
zero movement in the guitar. I've seen that even in the acoustic world where you can find a guitar that's insanely loud but doesn't resonate at all. Like there's no frequency content going on. It's almost like a
Right.
dead guitar. I don't think that's the case in electrics. I think you get a loud electric, you're gonna have a lot of harmonics and stuff going on because it's just the nature of that beast. It's a different
Right.
situation. Um, so again, your mileage may vary. If you're sitting there screaming at your whatever you listen to this podcast on or YouTube, um, more power to you. So,
Yep.
but yeah. So I think we've further crucified ourselves on the acoustic guitar cross for the night.
That's right. People are going to make more fun of us than they ever have. All I can say is when I'm playing and trying out an acoustic, it's a like you were just saying there, it is a totally different piece. Yes, I want acoustic sounds from my electrics, but it is not the way I want an acoustic to sound or feel when I'm playing it, when I'm trying it out. Like you said, there are resonance from the electrics that come from that stuff, but that is the strings banging around, so to speak.
What
Whereas,
I'm trying
yeah,
to
go ahead.
think. I'm trying to think. I had an anecdote for this. Oh, the Shengze, the red unicorn. We haven't talked about it in a while. So, when I got the red unicorn, I knew that thing was not good, right? And It's playable, but it's not a good guitar.
It is.
We've discovered some things about it lately that are just like what. But the Gibson SG that I had at the time when I got it, that thing was like 3 times louder than the Shingzai, and they both have relatively similar sustain. It's not, and they both, were reasonably similar in tone, given the differences between the guitars. Obviously, one is an inch and a half thick, and the other one's a quarter of an inch thick. But they were that was the first realistic notion I had was when I strummed the strings and I went, oh my god, my SG is like 3 times as loud as that. And you could play the SG in the room and just like play it and people could hear you. You couldn't do that with the
Right.
Shingzai. It's like the most acoustically quiet guitar I've ever heard for an electric.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep. Again, you're going to get different tones out of that as a result. So let's go on to the next thing. Let's talk about Jim's new gear corner.
What the hell did you do?
So I actually bought this a little while ago, but I forgot to mention it the week we recorded, and we didn't record last week. And so what I did was there was a special edition of a pedal I already had. So I went to the store.
Really?
What's that?
Yeah. Really?
Are you ready? Because it was the exact same price as the pedal I had.
I thought we were trying to be like practical on this show.
I am.
If you bought that special edition, that's not practical.
Well, I wanted another compressor because I wanted to do 2 different things. So I wanted the tone, blossom but I also wanted to be able to use it as a boosting thing with more.
I'm so glad we've
More,
gone video because now the audience
is more.
Now the audience can see when I roll my eyes at Jim. It's not just an inaudible thing anymore. Like you can, I'm sure you can hear it on the podcast too. But
so this is the Keeley. Look at the little heart. Isn't that cute? It's got a heart on it. So this is the Keeley compressor.
Is that because he just got out of heart surgery?
Exactly. Compressor Plus, and it is the I don't know, the bronze edition or something. Literally, the only difference between this one and the other one is in a black plastic cover. This is metal, and tonally they're identical.
They're plastic?
I think that.
I don't think so. I think that's powder coated.
It's powder coated black.
Yeah, but that's not plastic. Yeah. That's metal, man.
That's what I meant.
Yeah.
Yeah. But where this one is a shiny metal, they leave it alone. And these are brass.
You paid for his surgery, his open heart surgery the other day.
But that's too bad.
He had a bypass or something. Yeah.
But this is the exact same price. So if you look for one, if you like it, it's exact same price and it's kind of cool looking.
They're a nice pedal. I like them. That's just the Keeley 4-knob compressor. Is that the Compressor Plus?
Yeah, the Compressor Plus.
Yeah, the Compressor Plus. They're good boxes. Actually, I know a lot of people that really like them, and I've heard it a couple times in person. I think I played it once.
Monetarily, that'll probably be the last thing I buy for a while.
Yeah,
because I bought a car.
Jim bought a car, and he bought a beast of a car too. He bought I don't even want to say
an Audi A3 diesel, and it has got
He's going to be putting a lot of fuel in it. Let's put it that way.
What's funny, of course, knock on wood here, it's a diesel, and I was like, oh god, the freaking fuel price is going to be incredible. I go down the road, and diesel's only like 30 cents more than, or 20 cents more than regular. I was like, oh.
Yeah, it is. But you're going to eat tires. That's most people who have diesel cars.
I eat tires because of the way I drive anyway. So
you're going to be doubly screwed.
Yeah, my Civic, I probably have replaced I've owned my Civic 7 years, and I probably replaced all my tires 10 or 12 times in those 7 years, every single tire. I'm an aggressive beast of a driver. Most people are like, "Oh, Jim, I'll drive."
I get off that plane coming down there. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to say, "I'll drive. I got this." I don't know.
So after you said that the other day, when I bought it, I have been much lighter footed. My son goes, "Wow, you're driving a lot slower, Dad." And I'm like, "Yeah, I've heard." Because I actually like the tires that are on here, and I don't want to.
Yeah, the torque will it will definitely ruin your tires on a diesel much faster. In fact,
Yeah,
Teslas have that problem too, because they're
yeah, oh yeah.
super high torque. So, um,
Which is why you want to buy the super high end tires, and then pay the super high end price for tires. So
well,
yeah, but it was nice when I went to put the diesel in it. Um, you know, I grabbed the thing and I put the diesel in. I'm like, wait a minute. And then I found out that the size of the tank is the same as my Civic. It's a small tank.
yeah, but you'll
It
get better mileage regardless.
oh yeah, a lot better
Well,
mileage. Yeah,
maybe because you had a
mine's a
hybrid
hybrid.
before. Yeah, maybe not.
It'd be
Maybe it'll
about
be
the
the
same.
same. I had the same problem. I got the truck. I got the Ford Escape. It's not really a truck. When I got that thing, I realized the tank was not nearly as high capacity for like mileage distance wise compared to my other.
Yeah,
My other I was filling up every week and a half, and this one I fill up like every 4 days. It's like this is
yeah,
abysmal.
yeah.
um,
I'm used to filling up every like 2.5 weeks. So we'll
well, I
see.
don't fill up much on COVID. I think it's about once a month at this point, but
Yeah.
Uh, anyway, yeah. So there's been a lot of stuff going on. I'm working on music. I've got various video projects, and I have 3 projects in process in various states of completion, but none of them are done. And I'm hoping to get some time this week, but it seems like things are ramping up at work for a couple things. I'm trying to get some time off so I can actually do some podcast related stuff, uh, as well as some personal stuff. But um, hopefully this week will open up my schedule a little bit. But yeah, I don't know, man. Like music wise, I've written 4 songs since COVID started, and they're in various states of recording. One of them I have to rehearse the hell out of it before I can actually sit down and finish it. Things are shaping up to be pretty good for me. I might actually have a full length album if I include my EP material, which I am re-recording on top of the fact that COVID's going on. I decided I'm not happy with some of the performances. It's not really like I hate them, but I'm like I can do better now. And
Right.
I'm also looking at it and going, I can make them sound better too because I'm growing as a producer, and engineer, um, which you wouldn't know from the podcast because I slap this engineering so fast. I try to get it done so fast so I can get it out the door. But yeah, my engineering is gone. My skills they're increasing, and I really I'm actually I'm kicking myself right now because I'm like, well, I wish I had known this stuff I know now last year. But this is I'm going down this weird path of like I want to put other instruments on my records now. And so I'm
Yeah.
starting to branch out and looking at things like the uh, Source Audio C4 synthesizer pedal, the Boss SY1, the Boss SY300, the Boss SY1000. Um, and I'm kind of like, well, I could play synth with those, but I also know enough piano that I could probably just buy a hardware synth and do it that way. I've discovered this wonderful piece of software called VCV Rack, which is actually one of the few things that got me through the ear escapade. VCV Rack is a modular synthesizer application you run on your PC or your Mac or your iPad, and you can literally just drag and drop all this stuff and run the cables just like you do on a real Euro Rack system, and use that to trigger whatever, and you could build these massive sequencer things where you're not playing anything, you just hit go. um, and I'm trying to incorporate some of that into my music, but it's also getting me down this path of like looking at other unique pieces of hardware that can fit into my studio that aren't necessarily guitar related. um,
Right.
so I'm sure I'll have a little bit of that kind of conversation for the show in the foreseeable future. I can definitely see myself buying a Behringer DeepMind. I've been looking at those pretty much since I started on this whole escapade. Um, and I'm just kind of like, do I want to go that way or do I want to do this with my guitar? Because I've done it with my guitar before. I had the Boss GK2A divided pickup and the Boss GR33, I want to say. Which is whatever the small one was. GR20 maybe. I don't know. It's one of their guitar synth models. And it was just basically general MIDI. sampling with some pretty unique patch design stuff that was built into the software, and it was fun. It was a fun thing when I had it, and I don't think I was good enough back then to take full advantage of it. But I definitely know now that I could get a lot more out of what I had, because I wouldn't
Yep.
be tracking audio out of it. First off, I would just be tracking MIDI and then putting it into the software and doing all sorts of conversion and stuff. But it's like,
Right.
is a guitar as a MIDI controller really going to give me what I want, which is the feel of a different instrument, the sound of a different instrument? I don't know.
Exactly. That's.
I don't know.
I think that's a hard one. I don't. For me, I don't think it would. But I'm not. I'm not you.
Well, I mean, you can make
And
it convincing. There's a lot of guys that use this kind of technology and can do really convincing, wild things with it. I've done some organ stuff live with it. I've done, I played saxophone on one song with it. I know I've done various violin things, because my playing style kind of lends itself to violin-y type things anyway. So I know I can get away with it, but the question is, like, how authentic is it? And a piano player is going to hear that and they're going to go, that's not a piano. Like, they didn't play that with keys. And that kind of bums me out a little bit. I know it's like, who the hell am I trying to please? But it's just something that's weighing on me. Like, I'm not really sure where I want to go with that. If you're listening, join the Facebook group, like and subscribe, comment below. Let me know what the hell you think about my conundrum here. The other thing that happened to me, I have to stop and I have to take stock of what I've said to people, and stop and take stock of my feelings and try to get in touch with my inner self. So I have been on this journey, and it's sitting right here, so I'll just grab it because it's show content anyway, right? I'll unplug it and take this off too. So this guy is my 7-string Kiesel, which, if you've been following the show for any length of time, I've had this guitar for quite some time now. You can see that there's a big spot where I've worn it out pretty much already. I play this guitar a lot, but here's the rub. It's a 7-string, and I have had a love affair, hate affair with 7-string guitars since I got this, because
Yep.
I like the idea of being able to go down to a low B with certain chords. Certain parts of my arrangements now, songs I've done, are written that way, and I can play them in standard, and I can approximate. I can just transpose the chords and whatever. I know enough to do that. I can actually do that on the fly, which is pretty cool. But it just kind of bothers me, because I'm like, well, there really are a whole lot of 7-string guitars that fit me, right, as a person, and the kind of music that I make. So, Jim.
Yep.
The amount of companies that make 7-string guitars is like mainstream companies, right? Charvel makes one or two. Ibanez makes a bunch. Schecter makes a bunch, which I don't really want to buy a Schecter for this, because I don't think their body styles are that kind of neutral. They're very in the metal territory for the most part. Or they have a funky headstock or something, it's always something weird. LTD, ESP makes 7-strings. Strandberg makes 7-strings, which I'm not keen on the neck idea there. And that's pretty much it. I ain't a whole lot else, right? 1 or 2 models from PRS. Literally 1 or 2, right? New guitars you can get from PRS. And they're both SEs.
And they're SEs. Yep.
I mean, I'm already the caliber guitar that's beyond that realm. I'd like to have another 7-string. Now, before people start thinking, what do you need another one for? Tommy Emmanuel doesn't gig with one guitar, okay? You should never go to a gig with one guitar. Now, that being said, I could easily go buy a 7-string RG for $400 and take that out and gig with it. and use this
Or
guitar,
Schecter.
do these two together, right?
Yeah.
Or a El Cheapo Schecter, which we just talked about. I have my reservations there. I would probably go with an LTD before I would go with a Schecter, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
But I kind of sit here and I go, I'm just totally limiting myself to like a specific type of guitar that's just not popular. Um,
Yeah.
they really aren't popular. I mean, to the point where when I was a kid and they
No.
started coming out and everybody and their mother was making some sort of 7-string variation, that's just not a thing anymore. People don't care for it, I guess. And then I've had several people in the group tell me, just get a baritone. I don't want the longer scale. Okay? And there's another component of that. I've also heard people tell me, just get a baritone and play, whatever string gauges or whatever on it. And I'm like, the string gauges they always give out, the low B is going to be flapping in the wind. I play a 62 or a 64, depending on my Kiesel, because that low B string needs to be big and it needs to be tight. Otherwise, you're going to have tuning issues. Because what happens when you pick the note too hard, you pick the note too soft, it goes whoop, whoop, and it's out of, it just resonates all over the place.
Yep.
You have to be mindful of that. That's why bass players don't play big flappy gauges and pretend they're playing rubber bands. They You don't want rubber bands. That's the last thing you want. I've actually been looking at Aristides guitars.
Yeah.
Um,
I think it's Aristides. I think you were right.
I played one a while back, and I didn't know what their deal was. I just thought they were pretty looking guitars, right? Like that there was a kind of boutique metal company out of Europe.
Yep.
Played the guitar, didn't even bother to plug it in, right? Just played it acoustically, and I was like, yeah, all right. It's just because the Music Man that was hanging next to it. Little did I know that guitar was made out of resin and glass and carbon fiber. Like there's literally no truss rod. It's layers of carbon fiber, glass, and resin molded together to form an exoskeleton. And then they basically take this proprietary mixture of resin and inject it into that. So it's an injection molded guitar. And if you've ever seen their factory tour on YouTube, check it out if you haven't seen it. They literally take bodies off the wall that they put together and they start dinging on them. And they ring like a bell, man, because they're all one piece. And it's the glass bubbles they're using inside, I think, that are the real magic. Because if you know anything about glass, it resonates. It's why they make bells out of it sometimes.
Right.
So I'm mildly interested, and I can afford to get into an Aristides if I go to the Raw series, because I don't really want to look on that guitar. When you get a painted one, you're paying like $3,000, and quite frankly, why would you pay for a painted resin guitar when you could get one that's dyed? I think that's a much cooler proposition, because then you wear that guitar out, it's never going to change color. Like it's
Right.
always going to look the same. That guitar will probably outlive you, and will never, even if it ends up in a landfill 200 years later, they're going to be digging through that landfill, and that guitar's going to be in perfect condition, probably still in tune, because it's not going to warp. It's basically impermeable to any environmental stuff. My concern about buying those kinds of guitars is like, can I have anybody work on it? Or is it like one of those things where I have to take it to somebody who knows about these guitars? Or that was a problem that they had with the Steinberger stuff, because the frets were glued on. No, it was Parker. Do you remember that, Jim, where the Parker frets were glued on? They were like glued to a flat fretboard.
Yep.
And people were like freaking
No.
out because they were like, my luthier doesn't know what to do. Well, cut the tangs off the frets and file them down and glue them on there. What the hell's the problem? Well, there's a little thing called intonation, and
Yep. Yep. And fret positioning, yeah, there's a reason for what
it's
they do,
critical.
but
It's pretty important.
yep,
It might make a difference.
kind of.
Who was the company
Kind of.
who was the company that made that 18-string piece of crap for Jared Dines? Do you remember
Oh, geez. It started with an O.
the Australian company?
Yeah,
Um,
didn't it? Not
I should look at
Osiris.
that. I should look at them too.
Um,
Ormsby.
Ormsby. That's it.
I should look at them. Ormsby seemed like it might be a cool brand. I don't know. They're kind of metally. Um, I gotta get like a compiled list of guitar companies. And I was talking to my wife. I was like, so basically what happened? I didn't even get to the part about what actually happened. So I've been looking at Kiesel again because I'm like, they're really the only company that makes a 7-string I'm even interested in at this point. And they did their Labor Day weekend sale, right? And I could have gotten like $750 in options for free, basically. So I was looking, and I priced out a guitar. I actually called them up. I talked to my rep over there, Mike Jones, and I got a quote for a guitar, and it was going to be like $2,100. I went with my wife, and I said, we got the money. I said, I know it's not the right time. It's in the middle of COVID-19 and everything, but I said, like, I can get a good deal on one right now. What should I do?
Yep.
Because this is how we do it in our house. What should I do? Because the reality is we both know that neither of us has any business spending this kind of money on anything. But it's like we need to have this conversation before anything like that happens. So
Right.
she knew I was already on the fence. Like, I'm not really excited about this because I'm not just walking in and telling her, hey, I really want to do this. I'm just kind of looking at it and going, I don't even know if this is what I want. And she said something to me that put me back on the path. And she said, do you really want to risk another $2,000 guitar on a company with the reputation that Kiesel has had lately? And I said, I don't think so. I did think about it for a bit. I didn't actually say that right away. I thought about it for a bit. I said, you know what? I really, as good as the one I have is, I'm comfortable saying that I don't know that I will get another one that's that good. I don't. I really don't. I don't. Um, and so I'm begging off. And then I've gone
So
back.
what is it about?
Go
What
ahead.
is it about Kiesel right now that's putting you off?
Uh, the fact that they've had tons of customer service issues in the last 6 months, with things like
Okay, I didn't.
mismatched baked maple and that kind of stuff because they just do it any way that they want to do it, and then the customer gets screwed, and the customer can't argue with the company and get a resolution. Basically, their customer service is crap over there right now. That's what I'm hearing. And I've heard that from other people too. But that scenario was a big turnoff. But there were some other things I've also heard that have been going on that I'm like, don't know. I wouldn't order anything off book from them because I definitely don't want a guitar I can't return. Um, and on top of that, I have heard of people who have gotten guitars from them that they could return that Kiesel wouldn't take back. So I don't know what the hell that's all about. I'm not getting in the middle of that mess. I know the one I got's good. I have a very strong feeling if I ordered another one, it's probably going to be good too. But I can't risk that amount of money. See, if I was playing with a couple $100, that'd be a different issue. It's $2,000.
Right.
Like that's a
Yep.
lot of money. So I don't. I mean, I'm not a gambling person, but when I go to gamble, I take $20. Okay, I don't.
Yeah.
Um. So anyway, that's kind of why I'm like, I don't really know if I want to do that. That said, they have incredible resale value. And I really think per that conversation with my wife, I was like, look, instead of trying to outlay some big financial thing where you'd have to put out like $100 a week until it comes in or whatever, why don't we do this? Like, I'll take the $100 a week out that we would have paid if I'd bought a Kiesel right now, and I'm going to put it into a savings account. And when push comes to shove and it's time for me to get another guitar next year, I can go get that money and find the guitar that I want, right? And so that means I can go play whatever the hell I want, and when that comes time, and find the right guitar to fit me, which I think is probably the smartest approach I've ever taken to looking for an instrument. I really don't want any more guitars. Like, I want to stress this to our audience. This is kind of more of a selfish need at this point because I need it. I really want to have it for doing some recording stuff, and also for having a backup when I start to gig next year, because I'm hoping to start like trying to book some gigs next year. The other component of this is I have great six strings for playing, old Stumpy or whatever other six string jam thing I want to do. I have two good ones that I'm looking at on my wall next to me that are like no brainers. I'll take that Godin LG P90 guitar and go play gigs with that. No problem. I mean,
Right.
it's not a pricey guitar, but man, it's a Dragon Slayer. And the S500, I mean, it's the best Strat that I've ever played that for my needs, that fits my needs and personality. Because obviously I played better Strats over the years, but that significantly higher prices, and significantly older. But I just don't. Like you, Jim. I'm just kind of at the point where I'm tapped out. I don't really need other guitars.
I honestly, right now, and the truth is, I have no need in any gear whatsoever, with the exception of strings. I have no needs.
I don't even feel the need for an amp.
Nope.
I mean, I've been talking about buying a Triple Crown because every time I play one, I'm like, they're so good. But I want to say something to our audience that's probably going to shock the hell out of everybody. But I'm to the point with amplifiers and sound and gear where it's like I can make it work. I'm not really all that worried about what I'm plugging into anymore, which is the weirdest freaking thing on earth, because that for 20 years, I've been playing 20 years. For 20 years, I've been worried about what am I plugging into? What's this going to sound like? And now it's just kind of like, well, could it give me some Marshall dirt? Because like if we could do that, then I think we're good. Even a Fender amp, like, I got my King of Tone. I'll just plug this in, and it's fine. But I'm really not like, I'm not hung up on gear right now. I'm just not in any way. Like plug me into a good amp, just one that sounds decent. I mean, if I walk into a gig and there's a Blues Junior there, I'm going to be like, or like a Roland Cube or something. But I mean, I can make those work too. So,
Right.
Which is crazy to me. I've been playing the Kemper, and I realized that like I haven't even changed the profile on my Kemper in probably a week. I had a friend in from out of town this weekend. He stayed over and hung out, and I did a little mini performance thing because he was here, and I was like, I'll just run through these songs, see what he thinks. And I didn't even bother to change the profile the entire time, and I was just sitting there thinking like, wow, that profile's been dialed up for about a week now. They haven't even touched it. And I was like, it kind of sounded like my Katana a little bit. That was what I think in the back of my head. Well, it doesn't matter. I can make it work. It just didn't even, I wasn't even going to waste time to do it. It just didn't matter. It's like, well, I'm just going to play because that's what I do. And that's the other thing is my gain settings are like not nearly where they used to be. I mean, I'm playing it like Jimmy Page levels of gain right now. It's it's not nearly like off the charts or anything. So, it's a good place to be though. I mean, you and I. Yeah, so Jim, I have to commend you for this because I know this episode is more of like a conversation between the two of us, but I have to commend you for this because you have bought and sold more guitars in the last 2 years than I've probably had in 10. Okay?
Yep.
You bought and sold amplifiers more times. Well, not more times than I've changed my underwear, but you bought and sold them more frequently in some cases. Yeah. I mean, I can't even there are amps that we talk about on this show that I'm like, oh yeah, Jim had one of those, didn't he? Like I forgot how Jim had six katanas. 6 katanas during the life of the show.
Yeah,
6!
5 or 6. Yeah, easily.
And
maybe more.
6 katanas. Like you've had 2 Marshall combos.
2 Marshall codes.
Oh, codes?
2 DSLs.
2 DSLs.
Yeah.
I was thinking the 2 DSLs.
Probably 3 or 4.
No, you had 3 DSLs.
Mustangs.
You had 3 DSLs. You had one DSL 50. You bought a second one, and then you sold both of those in the course of the show. And then you got a DSL CR, the 40 CR. You had an
which I
amp.
like much more.
You had an amp one. You've had
Yep.
God knows how many practice amps, which is
Really.
just hilarious to me. That's
So I'm
the
saying probably 12. But um it was a weird thing where I was searching for something that wasn't there. That's true. I was searching for something that didn't exist. Do you know how many Fender um uh clean amps I went through? I mean, I owned three of those little, what do they call it? Blues Junior?
yeah.
Three Blues Juniors. And didn't know they had foot switches. Okay, I'm just letting you know that's how fast I went through them. And yet, if you really think about it, this fiscal year, which is pretty much since I started at Guitar Center, I've only bought, I haven't sold. And it's funny because I bought that, the
Les Paul.
Les Paul. Well, no, I sold my two Fenders that I had bought before that, but I sold them to buy the one, the Holy Grail one, and that is the Ultra, which is actually sitting in its case. You can't see it because of my chair, but it's right there. There it is. There's the case. Um, so, and I purchased my acoustic. That was last year. My acoustic. This was the beginning of this year. The only thing I bought recently was the V that's in the shop right now. Still in the shop. I told them don't rush, take your time, do it right. I know there's a lot of people ahead of me and they need their guitars for gigs. I don't. So October, November, I don't care when I finish them. But the point is that as and I bought all these pedals. I mean, remember when I bought a flurry of pedals, right? I bought, I'd get a compressor, then I bought another
You still
tuner, I bought
have
this, I bought that.
still have like a $900 board. It's
I do, easily $900 board. With the two power supplies and the board itself
it's like
are like,
$500. Yeah.
yeah, $500. Then you add all the pedals. I'm over 1,000 easily on that board. And I'm not trying to brag because I see these channels. My stuff is hidden. You know why
Yeah.
my stuff is covered? Because it gets used.
Yeah.
It leaves the house.
My fanciest
Yeah.
piece of gear is under a cat blanket. We
I got-
don't
oh,
actually
I gotta-
try to show off what we have.
I'll introduce the puppy before the end of the show. But the truth of the matter is, and I know you're kind of in the same boat I am right now. I don't need anything. I bought this because it was. Remember, I got it for the price I got. So I could share that with you and you alone. But
But you never need
I'd
it
pay a lot
until
for
you
this.
actually need it, right? Like till you
But
go to
it's-
the
it's-
gig and then something pops and you're like, oh crap,
Right,
I don't
I
have a
can go,
backup
okay,
guitar.
throw that in. Yeah. And so the point that I'm trying to make isn't that I'm bragging. I don't. We do this show. I don't have everything hanging behind me in this, elaborate array of stuff, of a wall of gear, and and if if you tell me, if you're a guitar player and you tell me that you've got a wall of gear and you've got uh uh layers of pedals and you've got amps coming out of your yin yang, and you're not Tim Pierce who's using like one for 5 minutes to get one tone and another because he's getting paid to do it. He sits in that cockpit, he calls it, for a reason, right? So that he can
He's like
everything
he
is
plays
plugged
one
in.
long sustained note through the plexi and then he switches over to the twin for a few minutes.
Right. And he switches out guitars, and he even admits he's got more dings and dents in his guitars from bringing them in and out of that little area. He's got like this little dinky.
Yeah, it's like a place that could just fit your butt through it, you know?
he's like this getting out, right? But the point I'm trying to make is he's doing that for a reason. He's that is his profession. Um, I cannot wrap my head around people who believe these channels and these people who tell them, "Oh yeah, these are all my favorites." Oh, shut up! You are not playing 12 guitars a day, and you are not. you were not playing. If you're not playing, a couple, maybe three or four, I can see three or four. Max, I can see three or four. But to say that you're playing that many and you're not a professional musician, I just find it, suspect.
All right, all right.
I
I gotta share why I had to look at my phone during the episode.
Sure,
And this
go
is
for it.
this is a totally personal thing. Um, I have for years heard of the show Twin Peaks, right? And
Oh yeah.
I had never watched any of it. And so I saw it's
Okay.
on Netflix the other day, and I'm like, all right, I'll bite. So
Oh, can you bring Drogon over for a second?
I started watching, right? I'm knee deep in it now. I'm season 2 somewhere. And I ran into my brother yesterday at my parents' house. They were having a cookout, so I went over there and hung out for a minute. And I started to talk to him. And before I left, he started watching it. And then he just sent me a message during the show saying donuts. And I'm laughing
Ah,
because I remember all the donuts. Yeah, like, do you want to get me some donuts? No, I don't. Anyway,
you're gonna hate the ending.
no,
But
I'm
I'm not
not.
gonna.
No, I'm
I'm not
not
gonna.
because they finished it on Showtime.
Oh, you saw it? Oh,
No,
okay.
I know that
Oh,
they did the revival and all that, so I'm not gonna hate the ending.
okay, you've seen it. Okay, I'm gonna introduce my new family member here for a second. Here he is. This is okay. Stay there so you can take him back.
Good God,
This is Drogon. Drogon, hi.
that
Say hi, Drogon.
that
No,
dog
no,
is
look at the camera,
infinitesimally
buddy.
small.
Isn't he adorable?
He's tiny.
His name is Drogon. He is 8 weeks old. He is like a little puff ball. Um, and he is camera shy right now. He's usually very camera uh
Ready.
good, but I think he's tired. Is he tired?
He
My
looks like
son
it.
said he's
He looks
tired.
exhausted. Go lay
Hey, to the
down.
camera, say hi, guys.
He's like, what are you doing to me?
My son's right there. So don't think I'm just like
You're just throwing him across the room? Like, that's what I do with my cats. I'm like, wee!
yeah, the cats always land on their feet. You never know where the dog's gonna
Have
land.
you ever seen that movie UHF? Where today we're
Yes,
teaching
with
poodles how to fly. Throwing them out the window on a pile of dead poodles. It's awful.
the Weird Al movie. Oh my
Yeah,
god.
yeah.
Oh my god. That movie,
Badgers?
you know, but anyway, getting back to the gear thing, I think that you know, even my interface, I kept the only thing now that I'm going to say this with a caveat. The only thing I might get is a captor, a 2 notes captor. Was it the Captor X or the
That
Captor
yeah,
Plus?
you
Whatever.
want the one yeah, you want the higher end captor, right?
Right.
Captor
So
X.
that it can go right out of the other 8 ohm connection on my um, amp, go right into thing.
You know what?
That's the only thing that.
I'm that is something I am gonna get this probably this fall, winter,
Yep.
solstice, whatever the hell you want to call it.
Yes.
Probably gonna get a another computer, not to replace the one I have, but just strictly for
Right.
recording and mobile, so I can move it around. So the
Yep.
kids, if they want to use the computer, can use the computer, and I'm not tied down here. My wife uses it for video editing as well, so that's another thing. Like, it would be nice for me able to go and do recordings in the bedroom and stuff. COVID is making me realize I should be way more flexible than I am,
Right.
because I can't move around my house. I'm stuck in one room. I don't have a laptop.
Right.
So this is my life, which is why it always looks like a
Yep.
disaster. That's why there's curtains sitting over there, right? So that's gonna happen, and I'm gonna get an interface. And I basically told my wife the other day, I said, I'm just gonna get a UAD because
Yeah.
listen, it as
Universal audio.
much as I hate the walled garden thing, right? I mean
Yep.
I can't say it strongly enough how much I hate that concept. I'm looking at the UAD stuff and saying it's the industry standard right now.
You look at the Apollo.
Yeah, I hadn't even looked at what Billie Eilish's brother did their record on. You know, that's the big thing. It's like, oh, he did it at home. You know, I am willing to bet it was a UAD interface.
I'm willing to agree with you
I
100%.
honestly, and I've heard. Okay, so who was I think it was Andy James or somebody like that said that they do drums with the Focusrite, And I kind of giggled because I'm like, okay, so what? Because I have a PreSonus, interface, and I can do drums with it. I have enough inputs to do drums. Here's the reality. If I do this with the PreSonus, I'm going to do so much massaging inside the DAW to make it sound good because the preamps suck on it. They're not good. I mean, okay, so they're not bad. I wanna back up. Like compared to the interfaces that I grew up with, when I was in college, I got my first interface. It was an Emu, which is basically Creative Labs, right? Like super high end stuff at that time because they bought Emu, who used to be like a synthesizer manufacturer or something like that. Um, the Emu I had sounded okay. The preamps on it were not great. It was reasonably well rated, and I didn't know enough about recording to take advantage of what I had. So fast forward a couple years, I install it in another PC because I actually still had the PC cards and everything. This is probably 10 years ago at this point. And then I got to go kind of run through what was going on with it. The breakout box didn't work for some reason, but the existing like microphone preamps that were on it were not good. They were pretty bad. And I had, gosh, what was the other interface I had? I had something else back then too that was not good either. Oh, that was the other PreSonus box I had. They had this little modular box, and I forget what it was called, but the whole idea was like you could daisy chain them together. And it was terrible. The preamps in it were horrendous. And they were noisy as I'm going to keep away from the explicit rating, but yes, you know the word that I wanted to say.
Yep.
They were noisy as shit. Okay.
Yep.
And it was a,
I don't know how far away you were from it, but sure, okay.
so when I got my Steinberg interface, right, my Cubase interface from like, that's probably 7 years ago now, 6 years ago, that thing was a step in the right direction. The preamps on it were pretty good. Okay, for that time period, they were pretty good. They were warm, they were punchy, they had a little bit of clarity on the top end. They were not like too fat and stuff. Like they weren't farty. Some of these, that's what, okay, so I have a Focusrite at my office that is for work. I do voiceover stuff with it. The Focusrite I have at work does not sound good. Okay, it sounds big and it's big and fat, but there's nothing going on in the top end. So I'm boosting 1000 hertz on up every time I'm recording something because there's nothing going on in the top end, no matter what microphone I throw at it. The PreSonus is very similar. There's not a whole lot going on in the top end. Now, I can get away with it because I have kind of a nasally voice, but when I'm recording other people who are speaking, this would not cut it. Okay? And not without post-processing, a lot of post-processing, right? And if you could think about that, that's just voice, right? So try to do a drum kit, which is literally 7 different voices or 15 different voices in some cases. Or however big the kit is, right? Depending on how many mics you got going and stuff. Plus you got all the phasing issues. And then you run into this thing where there's not really like this treble clarity that you would expect. And then you run it into your DAW, and you're going to have to basically use all your system resources to print these drums so that you can get them to sound good to print them. And then you lose the ability to go back and change that stuff if you need to for the mix because you printed it. Okay, so UAD, because the stuff runs inside the box, a lot of their plugins runs inside. I think that's actually an advantage. And I think the preamps on them actually sound pretty good without anything applied. The other box that really stands out against the UAD is the audience stuff. Now, I haven't seen their prosumer stuff. They've got a new line out that's all prosumer, but the stuff they were selling through Sweetwater, I got a chance to mess around with it and hear it. Not last Gear Fest that was in person, but the one before that. They're pretty good sounding. I mean, their preamps sounded pretty. They had a lot of they were a very vintage sounding preamp, whereas these are definitely modern, definitely more EDM focused in my mind because they got that solid low end thing going on. Um, and this is not something that somebody who doesn't do a lot of recording is going to be like super familiar with. If you're just getting started with recording, just go buy yourself a Focusrite. Just go buy yourself a PreSonus. You don't really actually have to have these pre's until you know why you have to have them or why you want them, because you don't really even have to have them. Then I could just still do post processing. But the point is, you might find that they work for you, but for the kinds of applications I need, it's not going to fit. Not going to fit. And for people like Andy James claiming he's doing, I think it was Andy James, I think, who said he did all his drums with PreSonus, not PreSonus, but the Focusrite Scarlett 2i or 8i or whatever, 18i8, which I think is the one I have at work. I highly doubt that. And if he did, he's doing a lot of post processing. I highly doubt it. Same thing as people saying, I just recorded my pod. I recorded my pod. Okay, who's your mix engineer? Because the reality is this: albums are made twice. They're made once by the band and then sent to a mix engineer who does it again. And they do it by, just basically making the mix, right? So you might think, I just recorded this pod straight into here, and then the mastering guy didn't do anything and the mix guy didn't do anything. But if you're in a major label and you've done that, you didn't just use a pod. Don't lie. Don't lie to yourself. Don't lie to other people. Because we all know that that's a whole other ball of wax in terms of how that sound gets treated. I'm not saying that I could be able to pick out a pod on the radio, but there are definitely some sounds I've heard in the past where I'm like, that was not what they said it was. Like, they took a direct guitar track when they recorded that, and then they went and reamped it, because there's no way in hell that was done digitally. There are definitely times, especially older records, more than new stuff. Like, when the Pod XT came out and stuff like that, it becomes a lot harder to tell. But like the original Pod, the Pod 2.0, I can remember Steve Morse saying he used the Pod 2.0 on something, and people like lost their minds. They were like, "Oh, he's a Pod 2.0 user." And then he quickly, in the next interview you read with him, he was saying, "Well, I did use the Pod on this, but we only used it for doubles because we realized that it didn't sit well in a track by itself." Because he probably talked to the mix engineer. The mix engineer was like, "No, we didn't use that." Like, what are you talking about? We took your direct signal and then we reamped it through a JSON 800 and it's like, oh, is that what we did? Oh, I know I was monitoring it with the pod.
Yeah,
I think also you're not gonna. So like, if you're a metal band, and I'm not saying this to frustrate anyone, like, I like metal too. I listen to, various metal artists, vintage and new, right? You don't really require the levels of dynamics in that music that, say, like, blues or country or jazz requires in their music. And so when a band says, in the metal genre, I think it's Meshuggah has done this, right? Where they're like, we recorded our entire album on a Pod XT Live or Pod XT Pro or something like that. And it's like, okay, yeah, because the gain was always at 7 or 8 with some sort of tube screamer out front. Like, I could buy that. It's like, there's not a clean part on that record, like, and there's also this misnomer that people are like, well, we did the whole record this way. And I remember, I think it was Mark Tremonti. Mark Tremonti has made a lot of mistakes in interviews over the years. There used to be a clip of him saying, "I want my guitars to sound the meanest, the meanest guitar ever," and it was literally like, and then they spliced that with him playing like one of the clean parts off of like the second album, like Arms Wide Open or something like that, and it's like the meanest that it could ever sound, and then they're like, with arms wide open. It's like, with this clean guitar. And it was just so funny because I'm like listening to this. I'm like, dude, you can't pretend like that album is the heaviest thing you've ever done. There's no way.
Right.
There's no way. And he always made out like, well, this is how we did the song on that record. Like, we did the whole album this way. You know damn well that they're grabbing different guitars for different tracks. They may have 2 or 3 different of the same head to do different things because they sound slightly different. It's never, hey, here's the amp we're going to use, and we're going to use it for the whole record. It's like, what fits this song? A good producer and a good engineer will be like, what can we do to fit this song? Just like Slash and the Appetite for Destruction record, they use that famous JCM 800, the one that had been modded all to hell. They had a JCM 900 that ended up on that record, which I don't know how that happened because I don't think that came out until 1989, right? The 900.
No.
Um,
Yep.
Maybe that was they were saying like, oh no, it was a Silver Jubilee. Maybe it was a Silver Jubilee I'm thinking of. Because they're like, oh, well, that ended up on a couple tracks, even though he really wasn't into them at that time. And so it's like there's this big juxtaposition, and they had other JCM 800 heads in on that record too. So people are like, oh, well, that was the head. Yeah, maybe for like one song.
They spent a little time. Yeah, they spent a little time lying about that for years too, because they didn't want anybody to know that they still had an amp that they said they lost.
Yeah, yeah.
Was stolen or something.
Right,
that they actually stole.
Oh, and it ended up that amp is now in the possession of George Lynch, because Lynch wanted it to begin with. Lynch was ticked because I want to say it was like actually his amp, and it was sitting there being serviced. Right, and then they just started renting it out because George Lynch was taking forever to come and pick it up for service.
Yep.
But anyway, it's that whole thing is just like so hilarious to me that people think that records are done with like, here's the Les Paul they used to do this entire record. That's never how it works. I watched a making of Mastodon, right? They were like making of, I think it was The Hunter or something like that. And they went to the studio in Atlanta, and this guy was showing off all the stuff they had and the stuff they used in the record. And there was like a room full of amps. And he's like, this was on, a couple tracks, and this was on this one. And it's like, they didn't make a record with like one guitar and one amp. No one does that. That's just not a thing anymore. Because you want all those tonal textures and the ear candy and all that stuff to go into making these modern productions. And so oftentimes, like, I've heard some producers say things like, well, the way I get people to come to my studio is I have like these fantastic collection of great guitars and people want to use them. So Rick Beato's a good example, right? Like, he's got great guitars and great amps and great drums, and it's not because that's going to help his end product. That's an attraction to people to come and play there. Like, yeah, okay, so they're going to sound good regardless. I mean, you could have pieces of shit that sound good. That doesn't mean anybody's going to come there. He looks for the stuff that actually attracts people to, like, I really want to record a record using that amp.
Right.
So just keep that in mind when you hear somebody say, I'm using a pod to record my record. Like, if they're a recording artist, not real artist, but I guess everybody's a real artist, right? If they're a recording artist that's making decent money and has high-paying gigs and has like a large commercial side to their music, which you can't trust what they're saying because they don't even have control over their music to some extent. Like, they go into a studio, they record it, and then the record label signs off, and then they send it to their mix engineer, and then it gets distributed, right? Like, after it goes to the mastering engineer after that, and then it gets distributed, and everybody's happy, and nobody says anything, nobody's mad, because the record's selling, right?
There's also one caveat, and everybody wants to think that their guitar player or their bass player or their favorite drummer would never have done this, never had this happen. Sometimes the person you think tracked the guitar didn't track the guitar.
Oh yeah, that's a whole other.
And they played, and then the producer was like, ugh. And so they have to call in their buddy, and they give them a one-off pile of money, whatever it is, and then they say, "Thank you for coming in. We are never going to tell anybody you were here." And that happens.
People think that only happens in the pop world.
And there are people who have been on the cover of Guitar World, bass player, drummer, modern drummer, You name it, um, and they were not the person that did those tracks on those records.
Do you? I
And
mean,
it frustrates me. Look, I've seen some of my favorite bands live, and I go, wow, there's just something missing about this. It's just it doesn't even sound like and then I go back and I listen and I go back and I listen to them. And I'm not talking about guitar parts. I'm not talking about layers. I'm not talking about anything. I'm talking about simple stuff. Like, the thing that makes a part special, like Rick Beato will say, what makes this song guitar or this song great? And he'll show how they slid into a part or they slid out of a part. They used a weird chord or they didn't.
or he won't show because it got copyright struck.
Yeah. Yeah, and unfortunately. But and then I go, just there's just something missing here. And then I remember, because you hear about these things, especially from people, if you hang with these people, and then they'd say, yeah, that wasn't the Rolling Stones. It wasn't them. They were not, they came in, they recorded what they did, they got Mick to finish his part, and they brought in the pros from Dover. That's a MASH reference, folks. The original movie. Um, and then those guys come in, they layer down the real parts or the parts you remember best. Half the time are not the great musician that you thought, and it does not go as far back as you think. That's as recent as now
It's
that happens.
it still happens. It happens daily. People are bringing in ringers all the time. That's why
Yep.
guys like Carlos Alomar are still out there because that dude was a ringer.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and I mean, people seem to think that this was limited to. It's like in the '90s, growing up listening to the new metal stuff that I've talked about shamelessly on the show before. Um, I'm willing to bet probably 75% of that music was recorded by a handful of people. Because like when you consider how much of the drum sounds between some of these bands were like literally the same damn samples. I wonder how many guitar players actually played on the records for some of these bands. Obviously, people pride
Exactly.
them, and they may not even know they didn't play. Okay, so that's the
And
thing
that's
you've
the
got to
other side of it.
realize that
That's the other side of it.
they may not even be aware that it wasn't them, and it's so that sounds terrible because you'd like to think that when you hear a recording of yourself, you're like, yeah, that was me. Like I can totally tell it's my style of playing. But when you're playing rhythm work, which predominantly the guitar solo was dead for 10 years. When you're playing
Right?
predominantly rhythm work, it's a lot harder to tell, who it is. There are obviously some people out there that have very specific styles. But I mean, how much of that new metal genre was the rhythm work like basically identical between bands?
Yeah.
Which is why I'm kind of thinking like I wouldn't be surprised to find out there were like 3 or 4 dudes or maybe a woman, I don't know, doing like 70% of that work. Because there were only like a handful of producers doing it too, which was a whole other.
Right.
That was another thing that like kind of shocked me as an adult to look back at that genre and go, "Wow, I didn't know Rick Rubin did so many of these records." Like,
Yeah. Rick Rubin and
or
John Rock or
Bob Rock.
Bob Rock. Thank you.
Yeah,
Rob
Bob
Rock.
Rock did a ton of them, and
Yep.
he ruined Metallica too. Um, was that was Bob Rock, right?
Yeah, that was Rock. That was Bob Rock.
Yeah, he was the one
A lot
that
of
did.
people think he brought him to life, and other people think he ruined it. But
Well,
you know,
Saint Anger. He's responsible for Saint Anger.
oh
So
God help us. Yeah,
I
a
mean,
lot of people that are fans. I'm not a fan of that era of when I read an interview with Kirk Hammett that said he embraced the fact that they didn't do a lot of solos on the album. I thought you have just sunk to the lowest of lows, man. That's all that your fans want to hear. Your
I
fans
will.
want to hear
I
you
will.
play what you do.
I want to provide some commentary on this, and then we'll end the show. If you've seen some kind of monster, the documentary about the making of Saint Anger, basically, which was not supposed to be about the making of Saint Anger, right? But ends up becoming this thing about them in therapy, and goes off on a whole other tangent. Kirk Hammett in that documentary is like nowhere to be found for like 3/4 of it. He's off surfing, and just not like he's just phoning in. It's like not even there. And I got the distinct impression he was basically divorcing himself from the conflict. He did not want to be involved. And so when they went back in the studio, he phoned it in. And so he could say, I'm proud of not doing solos or whatever they were. BS. The reality was this. I think he's so non-confrontational, which given his history with other bands and stuff, like he was in Exodus and things like that, I think he basically just said, I just don't want to get into it with these guys, and they can sort this out amongst themselves. I'll come up and play the solos when they're ready to get this thing kicking. And then, of course, they start working on the record, and I think they were, if you watch the movie, they were definitely up against some deadlines, and I think they just said, Kirk, how do you feel about not doing them? And Kirk's like, yeah, it's fine. Don't even worry about it. Just let's get the record out.
Now, was that the one where Rock stepped in because Newstead was gone, and so Rock played most of the bass parts?
I'm gonna say,
if not all of them,
possibly no, because they actually hired a bass player while they were recording that record too, though.
I think. Well, okay, so there's a Gibson interview with Bob Rock, and he talks about.
Yeah, I think he did. I think he did play bass on it.
He's jumped in. He played bass, and then he toured until they found. Or when I say toured, they did a few like here's the album, and here
I don't think
I
so.
guess showcases.
No,
he played live with them.
Not to my knowledge. And it wasn't. No, it wasn't Bob Rock. It was Rick Rubin.
Rick Rubin. I'm sorry. Yeah, I get those two confused.
Yeah, right. So, and I do too, obviously. So, wait a minute. So wait, hold on. Rock also wrote and played all of the bass guitar parts in Saint Anger as Jason Newsted. Oh no, so it was Bob Rock on that record.
It was Bob Rock.
Jason Newsted left Metallica in 2001 and was the bassist of the band's live performance until Robert Trujillo joined the band in February. So wait.
Right.
Are they saying that Rock was the bassist band for live performance until Trujillo, or are they saying that Jason Newsted was? Because I knew they weren't playing at that time.
Okay, so Bob Rock, I had it right the first time. Bob Rock wrote and played the bass because he was just sick of it. They were looking for a bass player. One person I know was one of the people that tried out for it. But anyway,
a bunch of people.
They had a lot of people.
Yeah.
They had a lot of people go in and out of there.
Hundreds.
That's not really that.
Hundreds.
Yeah. Anyway, so Rock was like, "Oh, this! I'm just going to get these parts done." There's a great, if you watch Gibson TV or whatever they call it, there's a Rob Rock interview where he's got a long form thing. It's a good hour and a half long. It's as long as the show just was. And he talks specifically to, I think it was just showcases, but he did play live with Metallica until Trujillo was picked. And
but it's like 2 performances, I think.
But it was only, And he said he hated every minute of it. He said that was not what I wanted to do. I'm not doing that. And that he was that whole experience, that whole album experience, and Some Kind of Monster and everything else really drove him to where he just didn't even want to be part of them.
I think the reason they switched industry. The reason they switched to Rick Rubin was because Bob Rock probably told him, I'm not interested.
He was like, "Oh, you guys, I'm
well, he signed up for that and spent 2 years of his life recording that record.
Yeah.
Now he may have been doing other stuff on the side, but like
can you imagine how much money they spent on that?
Come in and record, and then you show up, and then the band's just fighting, and you're just sitting there like, what the hell am I even doing here? You're just burning my time.
You're playing referee and coach, and then they brought in that freaking self-help guru or guru.
The one who like got really frustrated when they fired him because he was like, "No, I'm like the 5th member of Metallica." Like
he needed mental therapy by the time it was done.
Yeah, I know.
Poor guy.
Because he started to believe he was a member of the band, or he was so important to the band that he was going to tour with them. Like, he was crazy.
I'm
that
willing to bet.
documentary is wonderful. You want to see a
Yeah.
band fall apart? That is right there.
Yep. Yep. That was everything. And in later interviews, Hetfield has said several times, it's just him and Ulrich are just two type A's that do
They
this all the
always
time. And
fight in the studio. That's nothing new. But the
nope.
problem with that record was they had just lost Jason Newsted.
Yep.
And then
Wow.
Hetfield went into rehab, right? And then that basically just threw everything for Luke. Because it's like too much major change all at once, and the band wasn't even sure they were still a band anymore.
Right.
Like, it was like, what is going on here? Everything has changed all at once. And then they came back, and like, this is what gets me, man. This is what gets me about that record specifically. But Load and Reload are pretty universally panned. People are like, oh, God. People still like the Black Album, which I think the Black Album is a little too much like Load and Reload. But
I liked the Black Album, but that was the end of it for me.
But anyway, my favorite record and the best one out of the lot was the one right before the Black Album, which is which also the one with the most problems, Injustice for All. But anyway,
Yep.
when you look at how that all panned out, Load and Reload were not good, right? Black Album, debatable, and because I know a lot of people like it, a lot of people don't, and they had Garage Inc., which is just a coverage record, like they could phone that one in, right? And then they did Saint Anger. Saint Anger is awful, but Saint Anger is the one that everybody hates, and I'm like, but what about Load and Reload? They're just as bad. Like they're like the songwriting is just terrible. And then they make this big thing out in some kind of monster. It's because, well, Hetfield went and got sober. So, like you think that the lyrical content was going to change a whole lot between Saint Anger and Load and Reload, and it really didn't at all. Which is why I'm like, I don't really think him getting sober really affected the band the way that they made out like it would, or the guys feared it would.
I get the feeling listening to Saint Anger after Load and Reload, because you mentioned that. I got the feeling that what he did, and of course I'm not in his skin. I think his ability to create was gone already. I think those brain cells had been killed before Load and Reload. So when they went in and did those, the reason I think that it sounds the same is kind of like, you remember those 80s and 90s movies that have generic music because they can't afford like real bands,
like
right?
the music from Twin
famous
Peaks.
musicians. Yeah. And so they bring in, exactly. You got me. You got it. And it's like, they're just, okay, here's some power chords. Here's a guy playing a fluttering solo. And then here's some, I got my SG hanging behind my head. And, and it's like, that's what Saint Anger felt like to me. Like a generic, okay, we've got to write, okay, what are we going to do? All right, well, we're Metallica.
The same thing we've
so
always done.
We got to write about this stuff. And okay, what key is the song going to be in? Well, of course, it's going to be an E flat. That's what everything's in. Just shut up and play an E flat. I mean, it was like,
we got to be able to chug the open string.
Yeah. That's why. They just tuned down, or do they tune down to D for that? I can't remember.
I don't know.
It was either D or E flat. I don't know.
I wouldn't be surprised that record was down to C. I mean, they went through this period where they thought they were a modern metal band, like they were a new metal band, and it was like nobody wanted to hear that.
That was the other thing, and that was another thing that what he got in Guitar World. He was talking about how, oh yeah, I'm so happy we're tuning down so low. He was not. Was not. He hated every minute. I'm sure that what he did was like, all right, you know what? I'm making money.
I'm just gonna do what everybody else is doing right now. Like, we got this.
How else am I gonna buy? What guitar did he just buy? The famous Les Paul, the green,
the green Meanie or whatever.
Greenie.
Yeah, he's had Peter Green's Les Paul for quite some time. That's
Peter Green's.
Yeah, he's had it since the '90s, I think, because I think that was on Load or Reload. He used that guitar for one of those albums. Yeah.
Well, he's been showing it off a lot lately.
So well, he didn't know what it was when he got it. He found out later whose guitar it was. Like, he had no idea, and it came up because Peter Green just passed. So
that's why they were showing it.
Anyway. So we have covered a lot tonight. I have been David.
I'm a Jim.
And tonight we've been Practical Guitarists again.